I decided then that it was time to start facing hard truths instead of running away from it. You've got to trust that you are going to take care of yourself because no one else is going to take care of you. I mean, people are going to support you, but they can't get in your brain and yell at your brain and tell your brain to stop being mean to you.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the ADHD Eavesdrop, where you can be a butterfly on the wall and listen in on my conversations. Today, I have Jacob Cook, a family friend who is just a wonderful person. They are an actor, director, producer, all the things that go into movies and drama. He actually went to Western Michigan University with my son-in-law.
Yeah, that's right. We were at Western together. We were in the theater program. It was awesome.
When I've talked about being in plays and in films and doing those things, they're always there. So, Jacob, you are my producer, my director, my acting mate, and my friend. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to talk about like how people function with ADHD, what goes on in their lives, how it affects them, because it's not like one thing that I think a lot of like neurotypical people think it is. They're just like, "Oh, you have ADHD? Oh, so you're like this." But there's so many different versions of ADHD and how it manifests in people. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I always say no two people ADHD the same.
No way. It's impossible.
So, Jacob, you've not officially been diagnosed with ADHD.
No.
However, you have some very strong tendencies,
Hmm.
along with some fun comorbidities that we see often with ADHD, like depression.
Yeah.
And you're gonna marry a girl with ADHD.
Yes. Yeah, she very much has ADHD. Yeah, I've never been fully diagnosed. My therapists have like suspected every time they're just like, "Do you have ADHD?" And I'm like, "I don't know, you tell me." And they're like, "You probably have ADHD." And I always ask, should I get diagnosed?" And they're just like, "If you want medication." I'm like, "I don't think that would work because I'm the type of person where caffeine affects me. Like I have like a little bit of caffeine, all of a sudden I'm like, huh, okay, I'm awake now. And I know a lot of ADHD people, it doesn't really affect them. And my beautiful, beautiful fiance is just the most ADHD riddled person I've ever met. Love
And
her.
I love you both. Wonderful people.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, like you said, people ask you all the time, and your therapist ask you, what happens in your life that makes you think, I might have ADHD?
I'm I'm really good at hyperfixating on things. Like if there's like something I have to do, focus on, it's like what I put all my focus in, and everything kind of like falls to the wayside. I've talked to my therapist about executive dysfunction a lot that I have really bad because I'm not the best at organizing my thoughts, organizing my tasks. That's something I really, really struggle with, and habit forming is probably my biggest struggle. I have a really hard time forming habits. I'll do like they say like it takes 20 days to form a habit. I'll stick to something for 20 days. I work really hard to doing it. And then the 20th day hits and I'm like, okay, well I did it and it's done. For whatever reason, I just throw it in the bin. I'm just like, well, we're good. We're chill now.
Can I tell you something about ADHD that you might not know about is that what happens at the end of that 20 days on that habit, it's not interesting anymore.
Yeah, yeah, I get so bored so easily, and I that's another thing. And it's just I always have to like constantly change up a routine, and I get so bored, Like you'll
So
hear some people talk about having like the same breakfast every day for like 50 years, and I'm like, how can you have the same breakfast every day for 50 years? Like, that's just an insane concept to me. But people can go through life doing that. I cannot keep things the same. It's too,
yeah.
yeah.
So with ADHD, our brains are motivated different than the neurotypical brain. And I don't know if you've heard this theory or not, but science is doing research on it and finding that a neurotypical brain is generally motivated by importance. If
Hmm.
it's important, I'll do it. If it's important to somebody else, I'll do it. Where people with ADHD, it's about novelty, interest, challenge, and urgency.
Okay.
Those are the
Yeah.
things that motivate us.
especially the urgency. Like if I have to get it done, by God, it's getting done. But like, it's just, yeah.
It's
No,
in
that
it
that
is
makes total sense.
absolutely, because when you were saying that, I'm like, yeah, you just lose interest. Once you've reached the challenge of the 20 days, right? Because it's a challenge. I'm going to do the 20 days.
Yeah.
Once you reach the challenge, there's nothing there to keep the dopamine flowing
Mm-mm.
to ensure that you keep going with it.
Yeah, it's just kind of like you just kind of you're on top of the mountain and you're like, well now what? I completed the side quest. I got the reward. And I'm like, well, I'm just gonna move on.
Right, right, exactly. Oh
I'm
my
just gonna
gosh,
move
that's
on with my life.
so true.
It's just who I am, unfortunately.
That's who you are.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny because you were saying that. I'm like, yeah, I really do see some tendencies there, Jacob.
Yeah,
And for
that's me.
and for a minute, I thought you did have a like I thought you were diagnosed and everything because I was like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, he's a out of the closet ADHD dear, and then I'm like, no, no, no.
No, my dad I think is the only member of my family who's diagnosed with ADHD, other than my niece and nephew. They both have ADHD pretty severely, but my dad has ADHD, and I know ADHD is mostly genetic.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't be surprising if I got an official diagnosis. You know, my oldest sister also suspects that she has ADHD.
And
That,
that kind of leads
yeah,
us to that
yeah.
next thing, which is what do you know about your mental health that affects your life? And we know that you are diagnosed with depression, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I have major depressive disorder with psychosis. Thankfully, the psychosis stuff only really happens when I'm deep into the depression. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder back in 2017. Struggled, but I've struggled with depression like my whole life. But now I've got a much better cap on it. Like the last, I want to say, has it been half a year? I think it's been over almost a year now. I've been really the most on top of my depression that I've ever been able to be. You know, I finally took some responsibility for myself and my depression and worked on it. Not to say that I
Tell me
wasn't
more
back in
about
2017, but it's a lot easier to get on it now.
so have you gone on a personal growth journey or have you just learned some coping techniques? Tell me more.
So it's a really long story, you know. I grew up in a household that was not about therapy. I mean, it was such a different time back in like the early 2010s and the late 2000s of when I was growing up. We didn't have these conversations about mental health that we had. We were kind of starting to. My parents just they did the best they could to help me deal with it the way that they knew how to deal with their issues, and that just didn't work for me. And in 2017, with the pressures of college, the pressures of just being a person who just didn't feel like they belonged very well, just sort of broke. I had a really major mental breakdown in the summer of 2017 that really defined my life. I was hospitalized for a week, got put on some medication, stopped taking it. I was going to therapy. That therapist suck. I was in and out of therapy for a few years, on and off medication. And then earlier this year, I started finally taking Lexapro, which has been the best antidepressant that I've taken. I've heard a lot of people love it. Some people it just doesn't work for, you know, because it's not a one solution fits all type of thing. But I just hit a point earlier this year where I couldn't live my life the way that I was, where I had learned enough coping mechanisms to know that like who I am, what I need to do to help to function. But there's this extra 50 pounds of sadness that I was just always carrying around because I can't make dopamine for whatever reason. So I finally got put on the right medication, and suddenly like this extra 50 pounds is just gone. And I can actually function as a person who's semi-normal, you know, and that's been pretty life-changing in that regard. Yeah.
They say semi-normal.
Semi-normal. Yeah,
Is it?
semi-normal. Normal enough.
Right. Well, in our group of people, you're perfectly normal.
Yeah. Yeah, which is
It's not a
hilarious.
problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, because and we've talked, I did a podcast with Savannah and Jack about the connection of ADHD to the arts,
hmm
and how the arts is just full of neurodiverse people.
It is. It is. A varying degree of good and bad, I would say. Because it attracts a certain narcissistic type as well, which is, I think is really interesting about theater and acting in general, is the type of people it attracts. Because you'll get these like awesome, wonderful, neurodivergent ADHD people who are just in it for the love of the craft, in it for all this awesome stuff. And then you get like these other neurodivergent people who are like narcissists and sociopaths, and they all kind of congregate in this one space of neurodiversity, and it's a mess. And that's something I've noticed about what the arts kind of do.
Yeah, I and now that you say that, like I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, there is oftentimes that one person who's just like, it's all me.
Yeah. I think it represents like the best thing about theater, which is like, hey, this is a place for you to express yourself, a place for you to be who you are. And I feel like a lot of those people who suffer from like who suffer from diagnosed narcissism, diagnosed sociopathy, because they're not always bad people, you know, they just need a place to be and express themselves in a safe space. I
Well, and it's
think
funny because when you say that, I think about how quickly we just accept them.
yeah, like we just accept
It's
them.
like
We love
because we're
them.
all where we are, right?
Yeah.
And I think in theater, people are much more ready to accept that people are where they're at.
Yeah.
And so it makes that a safe space.
Yeah, you're ready to meet people where they're at. It's a really nice space most of the time, but like every space, it can be violated in a sort of way depending on who's in it, who's operating, what kind of personalities mix. You know, I've always just found that a really interesting thing about the arts in general is the people who are attracted to it and who go to it. Because that's just so many different types of people.
Thank goodness, right? Because there's so many
Yeah.
different types of roles.
Yeah, there's so many things that you can do, you know, and I think like just at the end of the day, art is just a way of self-expression. And I think neurodivergent people have a hard time expressing themselves in a world that really only wants neurotypicals to express themselves in the strangest way, which is to like lie about how you're expressing yourself. And in theater, in just acting in general, it's in art, it's just like, hey, don't lie about it. Like represent who you are, wear it on your sleeve, own it. And that's something that I really like about art, and that drew me, especially with a neurodivergent look on life.
So when in 2017, you would have just graduated or been in college,
I
sorry.
was still in college. I think it was like was I no, it was the summer of 2016. I'm sorry. My years
Okay.
are off. Yeah, I was still in college, and it was like the middle of my college experience where that happened. Yeah.
Do you mind sharing what happened with your depression at that point?
Just a lot of like just not dealing with it. I didn't have any coping skills. I was so self-conscious, and I remember the day of my breakdown, I used to be like a really big like marijuana user, and I got high and I watched a performance of me in like my most recent production of Peter and the Starcatcher, and I couldn't watch it because I was just judging myself the whole time and making all these assumptions about me. For whatever reason, I just snapped because I had such low self-esteem. That was the catalyst, was that my self-esteem had hit the most rock bottom I had hit, and I was just inconsolable and had to be hospitalized. It was a pretty traumatic experience, and it was just at that time, I was also having these really intense flashbacks of like past traumas. I'd just be like standing in my bathroom, and then all of a sudden I'm like in a memory, and then I'd like wake up basically just still standing there a moment later. It was so insane. It was an insane time of my life. It was a haze.
And so I've heard so many people say, and I agree because I have struggled with major depression throughout my life as well, is that when you're in it, you don't necessarily realize how deep you're in
Mhm.
until you start coming out of it. And then it's like waking up from a bad dream. It's like it feels like the last however many months of your life were just a dream, and now you're waking up to the real world again.
I don't know if that was a sensation I had. I'm a very aware person, which is a weird thing to say. I have a very strong sense of self. It's weird because I can lose I can lose reality because I guess it mostly feels like a hallucination than it did like a bad dream. A hallucination that I'm aware that I'm hallucinating, but at the same time, just like, yeah, let's go down the rabbit hole. I'm such a good
So is
actor that
that
I'll
part of
just,
the psychosis then?
yeah, it was part of the
Because you said,
psychosis. I was just like accepting every thought that came into my head. I'm like, okay, this is reality. Yeah, this is what's going on. And when I look back, I'm like, man, that wasn't a bad dream. It's more like I look back and I remember it and I'm like, man, I was just so willing to believe anything just to not deal with what was right in front of me, like not deal with trauma with family, trauma with myself, trauma with the decisions that I'd made in life. When I look back, I see a person who is just unwilling to deal with things, and doing their best to hide and successfully doing it and being weirdly aware at the same time because it feels like a time of intense denial of self and of trauma.
you went to the hospital,
Hmm.
and I'm assuming they worked on some meds and did some therapy and those types of things. What got you back on track?
I think what got me back on track was I didn't want to kill myself. I didn't want to die. I did want to live. I wanted to learn who Jacob was. I wanted to learn that person. So I decided then that it was time to start facing hard truths instead of running away from it. And I mean, the therapy that I learned there like hasn't always stuck with me. It was the people that I met there that stuck with me more than anything. Because you know me, I love people. I love community. I love people coming together, and that's the thing that got me. Because I feel like the medication that they put me on at that time just it didn't work that well. I felt more numb than anything. And I think that's a common complaint people have when they go on antidepressants is that instead of like feeling like a normal person, which I think you really should feel when you're on antidepressants, you just feel numb. They block everything out. And I think they put me on too intense of medication, which is interesting, but I really worked hard to I worked really hard to get to a better place, and I started relying on more people in a support system to help me get to a better place. And that's kind of what that experience taught me was that I needed to rely on people. I wasn't able to save myself. I made the decision to save myself, but I realized I had to rely on friends and family and community to get myself to be in a better place. My initial instincts are to run away all the time, and I
Mhm.
have to fight that initial instinct. And that feels like a lot of the thesis of my life, like the basis of my life, is that I was given a bunch of initial instincts that go against my character and that go against the things that I want to be, and I've had to learn to fight those instincts sometimes and make new instincts, which is very hard to trust an even deeper sense of self. Like, because like through a lot of like meditation, there's that sense of like the true self and trying to achieve that. And I don't do as much meditation anymore. But that's kind of where I've worked towards is to the more truer self of Jacob than like the person who wants to run from everything. It's got to be the person who goes through the storm instead of runs away from the storm.
And you're doing that, and I'm so proud of you.
Doing my best. Thank you.
You're doing great. So when I first met you, let's see, was it Hamlet was the
It was
first time I
Hamlet,
met?
yeah.
Was
It was
it?
Hamlet. Hmm.
So that would have been, yeah. So I think it was 2022. So we've only
Hmm.
known each other a couple of years.
Yeah.
I have to tell you though that in those couple of years, I feel like you have become a part of my, my world.
Yeah.
I love having you in my world, and I feel like we've known each other a lot longer.
hmm I
And
I
uh,
agree. I think that's one of my superpowers. I'm really good at building community, really, really good at forming a bond with people because I just allow people to be themselves around me. And I do my best never to judge. I do my best never to be condescending and to make people feel bad about being themselves. And in turn, I'm myself around people. And I think that's what draws me and allows me to integrate into communities really well is that I'm just like, yeah, I accept you, you accept me. We're good. We're cool.
that is like a major shift from, 2017 or 16,
Oh,
whatever it was. That's a
for
huge
sure.
shift. You've grown so much. And even in the time that I've known you, I've seen you mature and grow. I can tell that you actively work on yourself.
Yeah. It's a lifelong goal, you know. It's weird. Like I'm so bad with executive dysfunction and habit forming, but I am just obsessed with this idea of like the true self, just always being myself. And I don't know why I love that, but that's just a lifelong journey that I've accepted that I want to be on and have
Man,
taken.
you know who I need to hook you up with? Cheryl Dix.
Oh yeah.
She is a friend of mine in British Columbia. She's a coach up there, and she does a lot of work with sacred self. She's just the true you and letting all the other stuff go because there's just that one you. The itty bitty shitty committee
Yeah. Yeah.
is not you,
Mm-mm. It's
right?
not. It's something else completely. Like something that's really helped me and through my acting of what I had to learn and why I think like my mental health and my acting go just hand in hand because through learning myself I get better at my art because I used to think that like acting was like knowing. Acting was knowing all these things and knowing who you are, knowing all that. And it's like, yeah, sure, it kind of is. But at the end of the day, it's about trusting. It's about trusting that you can do things. It's about trusting that you can act, trusting that you can be the person that you want to be and make the choices that you want to do. That's what I've like, that's the main takeaway of like my life is that it's not about knowing things, it's about trusting things.
Mhm.
And especially when it comes to like ADHD and depression, you have to trust that you can get through it and deal with it. And you've got to trust that you are going to take care of yourself because no one else is going to take care of you. I mean,
Mhm.
people are going to support you, but they can't get in your brain and yell at your brain and tell your brain to stop being mean to you. You know, that's not something that anyone can do except for
Absolutely.
yourself.
Yes. And when I talk to people about the circle of control, so there's a circle of control, and the inner circle is what you can absolutely control. Middle circle is things that you can influence, and outside circle is the things you can't control at all. And when you really start looking at the influence area, you realize you can't control it, right? So it's
Yeah.
really either you control it or you don't control it. And then when you get right down into the middle of the control circle, what's the only thing you can control?
Just yourself.
Just yourself. And so, how do we control ourselves to function in a world of things that we don't control?
And I think the big thing is trust. That's my answer. My answer is trust and acceptance that you can. You know,
Mhm.
it's there's no secret formula. There's no trick. Just like in art, just like being an actor, there's no one thing that's gonna make you a good actor. You make yourself a good actor, and you have to trust that you are a good actor. And you have to trust that you're going to get through your depression and you're going to be able to function with your ADHD. You have to trust that. And that's a
Mhm.
choice that you have to make every time. That's a choice you have to make every day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I will share with you that there were days that, yeah, I didn't want to get out of bed. I went through a major postpartum depression
Mm,
and things were very dark and very sad for me. And during that time, because I was out of control of what was going on in my brain and in my body, I dove into physical fitness and I was in the best shape I've ever been in my life. I was, thin, I was fit, I had great muscle build, I was, all the things. And I was the
Hmm.
saddest, most depressed I'd ever been in my
Yeah.
life. But when people look at you from the outside, they don't see it. They think, oh, she's getting
Mhm.
her shit together. Look at her,
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I'm just holding on by a string. This is the only thing I can
Yeah.
can control.
See, like I was in the opposite when I was in my my rock bottoms look very different of like I don't project strength. I project isolation. I just go to my base instincts, you know. I would just isolate from everyone. I would make the worst relationship choices and be with people who are just awful, you know, make friends who are really terrible. And so I can relate to the isolation of just like, yeah, it's so easy to project that. And I think it's taboo for people to say, hey, are you okay? When even when you're like, yeah, I look great, look how fit I am, and you're like, wow, I actually feel like shit on the inside, and no one's asking you, hey, how are you feeling?
I fortunately had a very good friend who recognized what was happening with me
That's awesome.
because I didn't recognize it myself. Like I just knew I wasn't right. Like I was
Hmm.
completely off. And I had a similar situation where I had a breakdown at work. I've never shared this story on my podcast, and I'm gonna throw some stuff at you here.
All right, hit me.
I was in service one day, right? And we were doing all this, stuff that teachers do at in services. And the woman who was doing the in service for some reason decided that I was the person she was going to talk to. They always pick somebody out, and I was it. I was not in the right state of mind. And she made a comment to me, and it sent me over the edge. And I started writing over and over and over again in my book, breathe, 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 breathe. And I couldn't. And I finally looked at my friend and I said, I got to get out of here. And I went down to my assistant principal's office and I lay down in a fetal position and couldn't do anything, just laid there and cried. But kind of the same thing where it was like, okay, there is something going on. And that same friend is the person who sat next to me and made me make my first counseling appointment and said, you need to do something. And I was in runner mode. I didn't want to necessarily kill myself, but I thought a lot about being that woman who drove away in her car
Hmm.
and they find her car and her purse, but they never find her.
Just disappear. That
Just
want to just disappear,
disappear.
get away from it all. It's crazy how it's the little thing. It's the little piece of hay that they put on your back and it just breaks. I'm sorry you had to
And
go
then
through
once you're
that
broke, aw,
because I understand that isolation because it's like you're just trying to get through and that's all you're doing. It's like you're just laser focused on I just need to go to work today. I just need to do the bare minimum today. That's all I need to do just to get through it. Just get through it. Just get through it. And it just becomes impossible to just get through it at a certain point.
and that's what
And
depression does. And it just gets exhausting. Like
mhm, it's so
all you want
taxing.
to do.
You know, like what's really funny is one of the ways that like helps me cope with things is sometimes I just like have to imagine that time is just standing still. I can just exist in a space and everything else around me is frozen. And that's kind of a safe space for me in my head of like, okay, I can exist, but everything else is stopped. And I think when we're in our really bad places in depression, that's where we want to be all the time. We want the world to stop moving so that we can take just 10 minutes. Just give me 10 minutes of nothing happening, of me not having to worry about anything, of the 10 million lists that I have in my head that I have to do. Just let it stop. Just let the world stop. Let the world not need me for 10 minutes. And that's what I think depression and ADHD kind of go together because like ADHD, you're so hyper aware of all these things that you have to do, or you're forgetting about the other 10 million things that you do. And depression is having the low self-esteem of just knocking you for not doing those things.
Yeah.
When it builds up to that point of just get through, just get through, just do one thing, just do one thing, you just want all that time to stop. But you can't live in that space because that's just bad for you.
I was afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, it
Hey,
is very
help
scary.
me.
You
I
feel
want to
like
die. I was resentful towards a lot of people for a long time after I was healed. I had some pretty significant delusions too, afterwards that thankfully I worked through. I don't really want to talk about those delusions because it's just like very personal. It hurt my family for a while, but I worked through them. But they were delusions. It was like this psychosis happening with my depression because I was unwilling to just be like, "Oh, I'm expressing these thoughts outward because I feel so hurt by you. This is what it feels like." And I'm just allowing my brain to run with whatever idea that comes in so I don't have to face the reality of it. That's the isolation part of depression, I think, of I want to further isolate myself so that I'm right, so that I'm okay with how bad I feel.
Yeah. You've got me really thinking about if you go through a period of time in that depression where you don't want to get better
Hmm. Hmm.
because it's too hard.
It's so hard.
It's so hard. And so it's almost easier at that moment to stay depressed than to do the work that you're going to have to do to get yourself right again.
Yeah.
Sticks you there.
Yeah, because like sometimes you don't want time to start, going back to the analogy of time stopping around you and you just existing. You don't want to go back to everything moving again. You want to
Mhm.
be in this safe space where nothing's happening, where it's just you in that of the like one of the finales of Futurama of just Fry and Leela walking around while the universe has stopped in time. They broke time and you just want to wander the world at your leisure to deal with things, but it really is you're just stopping everything for you to have like comfort. It's just for comfort to not have to live in the reality that things suck, that things
Mhm.
suck for you right now. And it's easier to say that it doesn't. It's easier to not deal with the trauma that's around you. It's easier to put that on other people instead of put it on yourself, to not take responsibility for your place within the trauma. It doesn't matter if something happened to you. You still have to deal with it. You can't stay a victim. And that's I think something that my generation struggles with is that we are very good at identifying when we are victimized. We're not always good at taking the next step and being a survivor. And I think a lot of people get into that comfortable space of like, I am a victim something very bad was happened to me. And they allow these trauma responses to take over. And it turns them into someone who causes trauma instead of someone who heals from trauma. That's the step I think a lot of people are afraid of, especially people with depression and ADHD, because you don't want to have to admit that maybe you did something wrong or that or even worse, you did nothing wrong. That's somehow worse sometimes that you did absolutely nothing wrong to deserve what happened to you.
Because that means it's completely out of your circle of control, you know?
Yes, yes, it's out of your control. And you have to
It's like,
accept and trust.
I am curious, how do you think depression affected your art?
At first, negatively, because boy, did I want to please everybody. I wanted to be a great actor, and
Which you
I
are,
wanted.
by the way. I think you're a
Thank
great
you.
actor.
I appreciate that. I wanted to be a great actor, so I would just overthink everything. And anytime that it was not like up to my standards or up to like one of my director's standards, especially in college, boy, that would just wreck me. It really isolated me in my art in a really negative way. And in a lot of ways, I wasn't even able to focus on my art because I was just so like, yeah, let's stop time. Everything freeze while I live and try and get 10 minutes of peace. And then as time went on, I learned how to cope more through my art with just trusting my instincts and not trusting what goes on in my head because the head is the liar, the gut is the truth. I think
because
that
the gut
yeah,
is the true self, the sacred
yeah,
self.
it's the sacred self. And like what is it? Like your brain tells you lies all the time. You have to get through all those illusions that you make. It was learning to trust, and that's how I really got to overcome a lot of stuff in my depression was learning to trust myself and learning that like I had my best interests at heart, like there's this true self that really cares about me instead of like whatever goes on in this bad boy that just wants to like make me feel miserable.
Yeah, we call it the itty bitty shitty committee for a reason.
Yeah, yeah, I like that.
Although, there are things that you can do with that too. And I just wonder too if you have a touch of RSD.
RSD, what is that?
It's rejection sensitive dysphoria,
Hmm.
and it's becoming much more looked at in the medical or in the mental health field as part of ADHD. And it's when you have like real physical and emotional pain associated with a rejection that's real or imagined. And so if you even imagine that somebody's rejecting you, you can go into an episode of just, intolerable pain and
Hmm.
just the world falls apart. And I'm wondering if maybe you have some of that going on as well.
That sounds right. That sounds absolutely right. It feels accurate.
It's an actual thing. And I didn't know about it. And I was like, all these years I've been thinking, everybody felt that way. Like everybody was worried about that. And I'm like, what would it be like to go through life and not be afraid of rejection to the point
Hmm.
where it makes you physically ill? Because I'll get nauseous, I can get a headache, I get racing heart, and I freeze. I lock
Mm,
down, right?
yeah.
And you have triggered an RSD event in me before.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh, was it during missing persons?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that that was getting in my way during that shoot was because I, as an actor, wanted to make my producer, director happy, right? And because we had to shoot it so many times, I was like, it got worse. I felt like it got
Yeah.
worse
Hmm.
because I was getting more and more in my head about the rejection, the reject. I'm letting him down. I'm letting him down and letting him down. And he doesn't think he's wishing I went to, he's wishing that he'd never asked me to do this role. He's thinking, is there somebody else who can do this? All of these things were going on in my head while I was trying to act that part.
Hmm.
And then he said the ultimate, just be yourself, just act like yourself. And that shot me into a whole nother thing where I'm like, I don't even know what I do. I don't watch myself. I don't observe myself. How am I supposed to act like myself?
What the fuck is he talking about?
Exactly. Exactly. So the fact that that scene actually turned out pretty good, I think
Hmm.
was amazing because I was in a state. And I don't know if you could
Yeah.
tell.
I could tell. I could tell. I mean, I'm also like I'm just good at telling stuff like that, but it was to like go back to that. I think something that because you're used to theater where it's like you've got an audience that will respond to you. In film, you do not have an audience. It is quiet. It is everything's quiet and then cut and then you get notes. And that can be pretty scary. Because like I know that whenever like I direct people, people get scared of me for whatever reason because I'm just really intense and I care a lot about the art and I care about other people's crafts because I also know that they probably hold themselves to a high standard that I also hold them to. And my goal is never to like make people feel bad, but it's definitely to challenge them. That's what it feels like my job is when I'm trying to coach someone through a scene. It's like, okay, how can we get deeper? How can we get into this more? And I see people get frustrated when I tell them to like take multiple takes. I feel like that is just another opportunity for you to have fun and explore a scene, explore human emotion because that is just it's just so it's that's fun for me. That's you want me to have a good day? Okay, make me do a scene over and over again and I'll just have a blast. And you did a good job, you know. I just was doing my job, like, all right, let's keep doing it. Let's keep trying things.
So see, you're going back to like, well, I didn't mean to do that to her. That's not about you. That's about
Hmm.
me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That that response was not because you were being you, and I know you, and I know
Hmm.
how intense you are.
Yeah.
And but that was my own personal response that
Yeah.
it didn't matter as far
Hmm.
as you may have that incident may have triggered the response, but you doing something to cause it, mm-mm.
Yeah. Because there's nothing I can do at that point, you know. I knew it was something I couldn't really handle. It wasn't my intention to like cause that, of course. I'm not a psycho, you know. And yeah,
Well,
I
it's one of those things though that like it's going on behind the scenes and people don't realize that there's all this
mhm,
shit going
all
on
of
in
it.
our heads, right? These stories that we're telling ourselves and these emotions that we're trying to control that are trying to get out of control. And there's so much going on. And then we are sitting there and on the outside, everything looks great.
Yeah. Yep. It's crazy where like back to this the idea of trust comes from, like how far trust can take you in your mental health series because like we're just shadow boxing most of the time when we're struggling with mental health. We're just fighting ourselves and we're punching at things that are just not there. And you know, that's something that like as someone who loves like teaching acting and having people grow with acting that I feel like I need to tell people more is that like it's trust. You got to trust that you can do it. And that's the secret ingredient. That's the secret sauce right there. It's just trust. And I think that's also just life in general is just trust.
And we know that trust is one of the hardest things to maintain and build.
It is. It is because it's very delicate.
Mhm.
Trust is super delicate. It's
And can
earned.
be broken so easy.
It can. Yeah, people can break it. But then you have to like, it's the hardest thing about trust is that you have to learn that when someone breaks trust, it's because they don't trust themselves. They don't trust the idea of trust. It's trust, trust, trust. You
Just trust,
know,
trust, just trust.
it's never about you. You know, someone breaking your trust, that's all about them, baby. All about them.
Here's your sign, right? You get to
Yep.
have that. That's not
Hmm.
mine.
Yeah. This is like, you don't get to carry that. That's them, man.
Yep, yep. I'm not carrying this for you. And when you learn that you don't have to carry these ideas with you, it becomes very empowering to
Hmm.
let them go.
Yes. Very empowering. I mean, I'm the type of person like if you want to be my friend, I'm just like, yeah, we're friends for life, obviously.
Oh, I'm
I've
stuck with you now.
yeah, like we're stuck with each other. Great, love that.
Woo!
Um, and I've had a lot of friendships come and go, and that's always been hard for me. I don't know if that's an ADHD thing. I don't know if that's I don't know, but I love connecting with people. That's just something that I love doing, and I have a hard time letting go of people, but when I do, boy does it feel great. I went through a span of time in college where I was just like, okay, I'm letting you go, and then I'm like, oh, I feel amazing. Oh, I feel great. You know, just letting go of things. The things that we don't want to admit is that even like when you're not the reason that something bad happened, that you still have to deal with your part in it. Or even worse, when you are the reason that a relationship ended, you have to deal with your part in it. And I think as people with ADHD, and I'm avoidant. I like to avoid the things, you know. I don't want to do that. Unless it like comes to certain things, then I'm just like, yeah, I'll go right into it. But
One of the things that I really enjoy about our relationship is that I feel like we quickly developed a level of trust
mhm,
with each other. And I know that we've had great conversations outside of this podcast about these types of things. And the one thing is I think that we always feel safe with each other.
mhm,
I mean,
yeah,
even like on the set and stuff like that, when the RSD kicks in, I know logically in my mind, if I really think about it, I know that I'm like, I'm fine with Jacob.
yeah,
Jacob and I are fine. And I tend to develop those relationships pretty quickly with certain people, right? The thing is with ADHD, we connect very quickly and we feel very deeply, right? So we feel extremely connected to this person, and then they get out of our sight
Yeah.
and we forget they exist.
In a way, yeah.
In a
Yeah.
way, like
Mhm.
I have been known to, like, somebody will text me and I'll be like, yep, I have to text them back. And then 4 days later, I'm like, oh shoot, I forgot about that friend. They're still out there waiting for me to text back. But out of sight, out of mind a lot of times. And so when
Yeah.
those relationships go out of our lives, I think for a lot of us, it's easier to let go of those relationships, because if we just separate ourselves from the person, we don't think about them that much.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Because I'm weirdly the opposite in that of like every person who I feel like very deeply connected to, I'm thinking of all the time. I think about all my
Really?
friends all the time, and I try to reach out when I can, and sometimes I'm just like, I don't know if I should reach out. I do my best to reach out and maintain the relationships that are important. I mean, that's how social media, I think, helps a lot of neurodivergent people, is that it helps remind them, like, hey, it's this person's birthday today that you really care about. And you're like, oh, yeah, I got to tell them it's their birthday. I love this
Right.
person. But
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is like you don't forget about them because you don't love them. You know,
yeah.
you love them dearly, and when you remember them, you're like, oh yeah, that's right, I love this person.
Yeah, oh yeah, this person. It's like you need like a collage on your wall right before you leave the house of like this is like a picture of all your friends. Remember that they love you and you love them. Like, oh yeah.
Yeah, I just recently did that with a friend of mine from Chicago. She called me right before the wedding, before Savannah's wedding, and I just recently saw the message again. So, when Savannah got married, obviously, because you were there,
Yeah.
and I'm like 2 days ago, I noticed the message and I was like, oh shoot, I never got back to her. And so I just sent her a text and I said, I love you.
I love you so much. I'm sorry. No, I get that. I also do that too. Sometimes I'll look at a message. I'm like, oh, I just put my phone back
Oh.
down. Like I'll get to that. I don't get to it.
And I don't get to it. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
Jacob, we have been talking, believe it or not, for about 45 minutes, and we've had a fabulous conversation. I love our conversations. I love them on tape. I love them off tape. I just love
hmm.
you. You're a great
I love
guy.
you.
But I'm hoping that maybe you'll come on my show again sometime and we can talk some more
I would love
if you
that.
had a good time.
I had a great time. Awesome
Awesome.
time. I
Good.
learned a bunch of stuff too.
Awesome. That's my goal. And so my drive, I was born to be a teacher. Like,
Yeah.
I was born to be a teacher. And like my first grade, I had a picture that, what you're going to be when you grow up. And it's me pointing at a chalkboard.
Teacher. I'm
Gonna
doing
be a
it.
teacher. I went through a short phase like my freshman year in high school where I thought maybe nursing or psychology or something like that. And I went, no, I want to teach. So I'm glad that you learned something. That's awesome. So, Jacob, if our butterflies on the wall have enjoyed our conversation and like our content, what should they do?
They should like and subscribe to this podcast. Hit the bell for notifications so you know
Yes,
anytime that Janine uploads.
it's worth it, right?
Yes, it's worth it. Janine's the best.
So, Jacob, thank you again. And for everybody out there, we'll see you next time.
Bye.